Okay, so moving on from Mixed Engineer, welcome back to ranking every Dune Imperium card, part 3. We're going to go from 75 probably down to 60 this time. Last time we talked about Mixed Engineer and a few other interesting cards. One thing that I wanted to mention with, let me see if I can find it. Was it Liaison? I don't remember. Anyway, I think it was Liaison. One thing I wanted to mention with Liaison is that this is worth 4 persuasion with Kynes. So, yeah. You might want to prefer to buy other framing cards, but this is the best framing card to buy in that situation. So, there you go. Okay. So, going on, we have Local Fence. I also think that this might have been the lowest ranked 2 persuasion card, other than Convincing, which is the absolute worst 2 persuasion card. Yeah. So, this is the lowest I have a 2 persuasion card. So, that tells you how valuable 2 persuasion is at a baseline. It's pretty good. It's a good fail state for your card. And that dovetails nicely into the next card, Local Fence, where I'm not unhappy to have this. It's got 2 persuasion. Unlike Liaison, it doesn't have the Fremen tag, and it doesn't have as decent of access, but it has a good agent box, and that's kind of what matters. So the agent box is really interesting because whereas a lot of cards like Worm Riders or Opulence, these higher cost cards will just straight up give you resources. This one just lets you trade resources between each other favorably. And if you look at the conversion, you're going 2 spice to 5 Solari and then 5 Solari to 4 spice. So you're gaining a little bit of value each time, and it's good to shift your resources depending on what you're planning to do. So, like, early, you can use this to get your Swordmaster or your High Council seat. Late, you can use this to save up for your Highliner or your big techs. One thing that I think is fairly unique about this card, actually, is that it does let you convert Spice, Solari into Spice. There's not a lot of effects in this game that actually let you do that. Most of the time, you think about spaces like Conspire or the Spice Depot in Uprising or whatever the base game equivalent was, you can sell your spice for money. That's usually the way that this sort of thing goes. So it's rare that you're able to actually instead buy spice with money. That doesn't happen very often in Dune. And this is one of those few cards that'll let you do that. And I really like that. It's good for Ariana Thorvald because she has a spice disability, and this card lets her recover from that. It's good for Yuna because Yuna has a Solari advantage, and she can buy spice with it as well. So it's a good card, and it's also there's both halves of the card are good for Yuna because you get 6 Solari instead of 5 on the first part. So either one of those operations is good for you. I wouldn't say this is an amazing agent box, but it's surprisingly handy sometimes. And knowing you have it, you can kind of build around it. Okay. Next is Thumper. I don't really like this card, to be quite honest with you. It's fine. I don't like having cards that excuse me, that are timing dependent. And that's really what this is. This is more situational than Carry All, which is its companion card. Because the Thumper, you don't know when you buy this card what's going to have bonus spice. There might not be any bonus spice, depending on how active the board ends up being. So it's a little bit awkward, but if you can double, like if you go to Imperial Basin and it's got even 1 spice on it, that's going to be 3 spice for no water. That's a really great deal. So I think this card's better at the lower water cost spaces, but it's the higher water cost spaces are the ones that tend to accumulate more spice. So it's not horrible. It reveals for spice, so you're going to get spice on this card either way, no matter what. I think it's good for Ariana Thorvald because she has problems getting spice. But in general, I wouldn't super recommend this card. It's also decent for Romber, who wants spice for technology and things like that. Again, I'm not super impressed with this, but I tend to not gather a ton of spice. Probably less than I should. And it's good for, repeated visits to selective breeding and Highliner and whatnot. So, there you go. Okay. Ix Guild Compact. This is one of the more strange cards in the game, in Ix in general. and there's a lot of things making it strange. It's an all-in unload card. Its top half discards cards. Its bottom half is an unload card itself. Things making it weird. It's got no persuasion. It uses tech negotiators, which don't come up very often. It makes dreadnoughts for you, but only at guild spaces. It's very weird. I like the theme of the card. You're having a contract between the Ixians, who are using technology, to and the guild, who are basically having those highliners built by the Ixians. So it's kind of a cool aspect of the card. I think it's good with holo projectors. Most unload cards are, but 2 spice on flip is great. And even without holo projectors, I think it can be good with other unload cards. Discarding 2 for a dreadnought is a kind of a steep price. Dreadnoughts, I feel they overcosted a little bit in Ix. They're good units, they really are, but 3 Solari for them, especially when you frequently don't also have spice for attack, is really a tough pill to swallow. So having an alternative way to get dreadnoughts is nice. I like this card for Romber because Romber can utilize both halves of the card. The dreadnought is more useful for him, and the negotiators are also more useful for him. So this is a really cool Romber card. One thing I will say about this card also, again, the cost is less heavy if you're discarding other unload cards for the dreadnought, right? If you're discarding a freighter fleet plus a dagger, this is not a bad action to take at all. The problem is with this card is that if you take this to fold space, you're not going to be able to deploy the dreadnought. But if you take it to highliner, you can. You can throw in that dreadnought on top of all your highliner troops, which is interesting. Good if you have spice, or not spice, I said nation devices potentially. It's just an interesting card. I like it on Armand as well. You can pick it up early, you can trash it, get all the spice, go for late game technologies. It's a fun card. The downfall of this card is that it has no persuasion, and that will cause you problems. So I wouldn't keep it around forever. I would maybe get a dreadnought and 4 spice out of it and then get rid of it. Okay, so we talked a while ago. Let me see if I can go back and find it. We talked a while ago about Cursed Smuggler. It's got pretty decent access, I said. Yellow and Guild. That's the access you want for the whole, Interstellar Shipping minigame. And that's going to come up again here with the Guild Administrator. But like I said earlier, I don't think buying cards for that strategy is really not that necessary. And the reason is your deck starts with 3 yellow access, and you also start with 2 different guild access. Buying more guild access probably won't matter because access to guild is decided within the first 2 rounds usually. Sometimes it goes into the third, but generally the first 2 rounds. So buying this may not make much of a difference there. That being said, it doesn't hurt. And if you buy fold spaces by going to guild, then you're going to have the access you need anyway. The trash on action is really nice, and these types of trash on action effects are better the earlier you get them. I could be persuaded that Fadekin Death Commando is better than this card because of the Fremen Bond aspect that is inherently synergistic with the card itself. But I think just going to guild is just so much more useful. In the late game, you're really going to like that you have highliner access with this. I have a player in my group who is pretty good at the board positional aspect of the game, but really struggles to buy the right cards and struggles to buy access, particularly to guild. And this card would be perfect for him because besides just having guild access, it would let him get rid of all of his daggers and whatnot that end up polluting his end-game deck. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I really like this card. I have a soft spot for it. But it is still at 71 because... and this is sort of taking a quote from Cheesable. But what he said was, I don't want to buy a bad card to trash out other bad cards from my deck. And that makes sense because, this card's not amazing. And until you've trashed like twice with it, it's still going to be worse than your Signet Ring. It's still going to be worse than your Diplomacy most of the time. So I see where he's coming from. That said, the ability to repeatedly trash, if you can get yourself to like a 9-card deck, that's just the perfect spot to be in. And Going to Smuggling, going to Interstellar, going to Full Space or even Highliner with those trash icons is great. So I do really like this card, even if I think it's maybe a little bit overrated. Okay, so we have Bene Gesserit Initiate. It's number 70, and I think this card's great. It's a nice little starter card for the Bene Gesserit archetype. And what I mean by that, if you go back to where was she? Protectiva here, which is one of, if not our lowest ranked BG card. I guess Weirding Way was the lowest, but yeah, Protectiva, one of our lowest ranked cards. You see that what it relies on is having another BG card in play, but you don't want to play the Protectiva first, because if you play the Protectiva first, then you don't get the effect. So the benefit of Initiate here is that it starts your BG combo. It draws you a card, so it draws you into your BG cards, and you get that agent icon down so that you can play other BG cards and get those effects. It's basically Paul's Signet Ring with a little BG extra added on. Now, I think the main thing hurting this card is, well, there's two things. First, it doesn't go to faction, which is not great. Second, it only reveals for one. And that ends up being a bigger disability than I thought. Because some hands, you're going to draw your Diplomacy, you're going to draw your Experimentations, you're going to draw your Signet Ring, and you're going to have to play those cards for points, and then you're only going to be revealing this. Even though you wanted to play it, you're going to have to end up revealing this. And one Persuasion, you're kind of like, oh man, it's not great. So I like the card, but it's not fantastic. Now, the funny thing about this card, I actually do really like it on Armand. There's another Bene Gesserit card coming up, maybe in 10 or 20 spots ahead of it, that most people think of as being worse than this, and we're going to talk about why it's not worse than this. I think that'll be a really fruitful conversation. But yeah, goes to any planet or Landsraad space, draws you a card. Nothing bad to say about this. It's just a slightly better Paul Signet Ring. And yeah, it's a good little workhorse. Okay. 69, Water Peddler. Yeah, so this is an interesting card. Like, it looks fantastic, and it is pretty good. It's very good value for one Persuasion. I will say that. As far as one Persuasion cards go, this is great. It's good for your Hollow Producers decks, obviously. It's great with Unload. The main issue with this card is that it can't go anywhere and it doesn't provide Persuasion. It's like a convincing argument that doesn't buy you cards. The water is good, very good. But I think I want to, unless I have Hollow Projectors, unless I have Truthsayer, I kind of want to get rid of this card around the mid game. Because by the late game, you're going to draw this and be like, oh man, I can't go to Highliner, I can't go to Hardy Warriors. That sucks. Now, if you use this to fuel consistent visits to Research Station, I think you're going to be really happy with it. And again, it's fantastic on Armand because he can pick it up mid-round, get water, and then open up new plays that he normally wouldn't have access to. Like Armand could go Smuggling, use Ring to grab this. All of a sudden, now he can also go Research Station because he picked up a Water Peddler. So it's a really good card. I think the main thing holding it down, yeah, this is tough because, like, is it a good card? Yes. Is it better than the average 5-cost card? No. Is it better than the average 4-cost card? No. So it's very good for what it costs, but it's not better than a lot of the other stuff available. I think the important thing to realize is, like, if you're revealing for 5, are you going to pick up Thufir Hawat, or are you going to pick up this? Unless you have a 4-cost card you also want to get, you should probably just get Thufir Hawat. That's how I feel about it. Good card, asks you to get rid of it, and in multiple ways. You want to get rid of it, and you also, yeah, like, it tells you itself to get rid of it. Not bad. Good with Armand, good with Unload, good with Sayadina, very, very good with Sayadina. This card, if you have Sayadina, goes from 69 to, like, 2. It goes up a lot in value if you have Sayadina. But otherwise, it's okay. It's pretty decent. It's good for its cost. Okay. And it's funny that we have these two next to each other because they do almost the same thing. I think you could argue that Water Peddler might be ahead of Duncan, but because Duncan has a lot more flexibility, I put him ahead. Again, for cost efficiency, Water Peddler is way ahead. But if you're revealing for 4, I think I would rather buy the Duncan. So Duncan Idaho, got to be the worst 4 cost card, but it has some uses. I had a Helena game on my channel where I ended up missing out on Lady Jessica and getting this instead, and kind of trying to find a way to make it work. Pretty interesting. Duncan's okay. So there's a couple things to talk about. So I think the main way you want to use Duncan most of the time is for the reveal. Use him as like a Water Peddler plus, because he doesn't provide persuasion, which is painful, but water is really, really, really valuable, and 2 daggers are not nothing. The agent box, I mean, it's better than not having an agent box, but it's not very good. In general, I don't think 1 water is worth a card draw on a troop. I just don't think it's worth it. It is not a good trade that's being offered for the most part. Now, there's some exceptions to this, right? Like, so in some hands, you need to draw cards, and Duncan Idaho will bail you out. And his bottom half does fuel his top half, but that's another reason why you should start by using his bottom half, and then if you end up with excess water, use his top half. He is decent at Siege Tabor, because Siege Tabor provides you a water already, so you turn Siege Tabor into basically 2 troops in a card draw. So that basically becomes Gurney Halleck. So this becomes a worse Gurney Halleck. Which, a worse Gurney Halleck is still a good card. Doing this at Arakeen, right, turns it into draw 2 and draw 2 troops. That's not bad at all. So there are situations where this is worth it. But again, I think the right way to play this card, or even, draw 3 or draw 4 on Research Station, the right way to use this card is to reveal early with it, and then if you end up with excess water, in some games you'll have like 6 water, and you won't have a way to spend it, and then Duncan will help you there. Yeah, but like then if you get to the point where you really do have excess water, then you start playing him for his agent box. He's okay, but he's a very clunky card. I think clunky is the right word for him. Good in certain situations, good with Helena, who can infiltrate with him. You're gonna run into persuasion problems though, so I wouldn't buy him first action if I could help it. And if I did buy him, I would want to get some liaisons or some 2 persuasion cards to try to offset his downsides. Not bad, probably better than Water Peddler, just in terms of overall value, but very weird card. Okay, 67, I have Space Travel. This might be a little bit high for this card, but it has a lot of things going for it. 1, it has 2 persuasion. That's always good. 2, it draws cards. Now, the fact that it draws cards to probably only 1 space on the board, maybe 2, is the reason why this isn't ranked higher. But going to Fold Space, drawing a card, this is a huge consistency booster, right? The Fold Space itself will draw you cards. The Fold Space itself will, provide access everywhere, while this card also draws you cards. So it's just a nice way of smoothing out your deck. And again, Guild is the most important faction, so I don't find that all that restrictive, the play effect. Now, that being said, if I already have Guild Friendship, I'm gonna try not to buy this card, because it's just not a very good use of your agents if you aren't getting points out of it. So if somebody else has the Guild Alliance locked up, or if you just don't see yourself going to Guild that game, then I don't think this is a good card. But it's good enough. You're never going to be unhappy with it with 2 persuasion. It's a very much a middle of the road card. It's okay. Not much more to say than that. It's okay. Okay. Imperial Spy. This card is what Court Intrigue wants to be. This card doesn't overstay its welcome. It doesn't stick around in your deck and cause problems. And it has a lot of other advantages. Sure, it doesn't infiltrate Emperor, but nobody needs to infiltrate the Emperor anyway. It's a very low value space in general. And the ability to go to Wealth and get an intrigue card out of it significantly improves the Emperor, or even Conspire. significantly improves the Emperor. It's got a dagger for your artillery strategies, although you won't get to that very often. And another thing that makes this card better than Court Intrigue is where Court Intrigue just lets you get rid of a bad card and replace it with a better one. This one just gives you a card, and I'd rather get a card than try to replace a bad card. And again, in this game, at least in Immortality, they add a few more bad cards, but most of the cards are good, and you can use them if you find a way to use them. So I would rather just have more cards than try to get rid of the bad ones. This is a nice little card. I'm never really sad to pick this up because it trashes itself out and doesn't linger around in your deck. So it's like, hey, would I pay 2 Persuasion for an Intrigue card? If yes, buy it. I would pretty much always do that, but sometimes you just don't see yourself going to Wealth again, and that's really where you wouldn't buy this. You have to ask yourself, like, will I visit Wealth again this game? If yes, I should probably get an Imperial Spy. It's a good card. Okay, Dissecting Kit. So this is kind of going to fall in the same family of cards as your Fatakin Death Commando and your Guild Administrator, where it's an early trasher. It does give you something for that trash, though. It gives you a specimen that's going to power your deck building by letting you buy Talaxu row cards. And it also, I mean, I think the thing that really is great about this card, there's 2 things, and I'll talk about that in just one second. Okay, so there's 2 things that I think make this card better than Guild Administrator. The first is the Graft. Now, the Graft is kind of going to hurt your reveal because you're putting 2 cards on the board instead of 1. So it's going to hurt your reveal in the short run. But the Graft allows you to combo all these other cards I've been talking about. These if grafted cards, these, well, if you could graft it, then all of a sudden this card would, etc. For example, Desert Ambush, right? Graft this to Desert Ambush, go to a city, deploy a bunch of troops, force a retreat, and then trash the Desert Ambush, and the fact that the card is kind of situational doesn't matter anymore. So that's the one thing that I think about this is better. The other thing I like about this that's better is that it, on reveal, now getting to this first DNA marker is not hard. And Scarabs are very, very valuable. They give you spice and they give you points. And revealing for a Scarab is no joke. This is one of those cards that's going to make that second Scarab point available that sometimes can be really hard to reach. So I value this for that reason as well. I think it's great early for deck building. That being said, I probably wouldn't pick it up late unless I thought revealing it once was going to be sufficient. Because in the late game, you're just not going to get the trashing going. And if you only reveal it once, then it may not be worth it. So good as an early deck building card, starts to falter off a little bit later. A really cool card. I'm always happy to have it. Great if you trash it to a Water Peddler. Okay. 64 is Spice Trader. This is a good Ariana card. It's another 4-coster that I think is okay. It came out in the X expansion. You can tell because it wants you to discard stuff. It doesn't have good access, really, at all. It has good reveal, though, right? 2 Persuasion, as we've talked about, is if a card has 2 Persuasion, it can't be that bad in general. A Dagger also helps, especially with your artillery, your Bashar, your Fremen Bond type stuff. And then the 2 Influence on Fremen to discard a card for 2 spice. I don't use that very often, but on Ariana, it's very important. And on some leaders, you can use this to set yourself up for a highliner, especially if you go to a spice gathering space with this. So it's not nothing. If you're using this with unload cards, it gets really good. Use this with your, your In the Shadows or your Chom Delegate or whatever. So I like it. It's a middle of the road card. I would almost consider this to be like a very much an average card. And asking you to get to 2 Fremen Influence is not that bad. Like 2 Fremen Influence, you're going to want to have that almost every game at some point or another. So yeah, it's all right. It's decent enough. Okay. 63 is Shifting Allegiances. This is actually a pretty good card. Again, as I talked about with Spice Trader, 2 Persuasion, really helpful, really useful to have as a fail case. Now, Its access isn't very good. Yellow and green, yeah, not that valuable. But here's something that does really matter, and that's that agent box. And I think new players will look at this and say, well, that doesn't seem very good, right? Go down a persuasion or a faction influence, and I have to spend 2 spice to go up 2. That doesn't seem good at all. And it just turns out that the way that you can pilot this makes it better than that. And I'll sort of talk about why. So, for one, you can go up with the same faction that you went down with. So, at worst, this is saying pay 2 spice, go up 1 with a faction, which is not bad, right? That's the worst case scenario. Now, sometimes you've maxed out an alliance already and nobody's going to contest you on it. Then you can go down with a faction and then take a point elsewhere. Because remember, 2 bumps on a faction track is almost always a point. Yeah, it's almost always a point. And the critical thing about this card, the reason it's worth paying the spice, is that it allows you to surprise people and take their alliances they didn't think were at risk, right? You can use this card if you go to the shipping track, like God forbid Interstellar shipping, right? Ship down, take an any faction bump. Well, now all of a sudden you can go up 3 bumps with a faction, and that's going to steal almost any alliance that isn't locked in. So that's really the reason that this is valuable. It lets you be more active in the game and target players who are ahead, take their alliances. And yes, you're not always going to have that 2 spice, but it goes to yellow for a reason, right? The shipping track gives you the spice you need for this. So does the maker spots on the board. So that's one reason why this card is so good. And if you really can't play it, no problem, right? No problem. Just reveal it for 2 persuasion. You're going to be okay. Worth mentioning also, Memnon. If you take High Council with this card, you can use it to go up 3 bumps with somebody, same as with the shipping track. So there's another benefit to this card. And Memnon makes spice on his own. So this is a great card to use for him for that, because the cost is less and then the benefit is more, especially with his other ability. So, yeah, just a solid card. Always happy to have it. As you can see, we're starting to get into cards that are definitive improvements over your deck. Like, at this point, we're getting into cards where I would pretty much always like to have it, unless I'm doing like a, Kwisatz selective breeding type thing where I want to draw into the same card as often as possible. That happens sometimes, but outside of those types of situations, we're getting into cards now that I would just say in some sense are good. Okay, Chief Guild Administrator. This might be ranked a little too high. It's funny. It's like an upgraded version of the Guild Administrator, right? Like this card goes to Guild and Desert and trashes, right? 1 persuasion. Whereas this card goes to Guild and Desert and City and trashes and has 1 persuasion and also a shipping bump. So it's a better card, right? Well, yeah, a little bit, but not as much as you'd think. There's a couple problems with this card, and the reason why it's not higher, even though everything about this card looks fantastic, it's not as fantastic as it looks. First is that revealing for a shipping bump is not as good as an agent action shipping bump. It's just not. It's fine. Revealing for a shipping bump is very good, right? This is better than landing rights. But you can't deploy the troops. It's hard to use the faction bump. It's hard to use the resources. So, it's okay. It has persuasion, so you're never sad about it. Like objectively, it's a better than average reveal. Now, the weird thing is the agent box, right? Discard a card to trash a card. Well, this is where it actually could be worse than its subordinate, because sometimes you don't want to discard a card to trash a card. Now, it's good with unload, right? With unload, you can discard a unload card, get the unload effect, then trash the same unload card and get the same effect twice, right? So that's pretty good. If you can use this as an unload enabler, it's fantastic. But if you're just using it for like a dagger, it's fine. Sometimes the card that you want to trash you don't want in your hand anyway, or you don't need. But it is a restriction, and it's enough of a restriction that I think in this situation it actually ends up being more of a downside than a benefit. Now, the access is good, and I'm never sad to have this. If on round one of the game you said, "Hey, we will just like put this in your deck. Do you want it?" I would say, "Yeah, for sure." Like if I could use this, if this cost 3 and I could use Armand's Signet Ring to put it in my deck, I would do that very frequently. It's just that I think this card suffers from being not as good as it looks, despite the fact that it's still pretty decent. So that's how I feel about Chief Guild Administrator. It's okay. It's fine. Okay. 61, we have Bene Lilacs Researcher. This one is another graft enabler, right? It has graft on it and it gives you an effect for grafting. If you get to the end of the research track, this draws a card, which will replace the negative card tempo that you got from grafting. It enables all of those if grafted synergies, and the way that I even think about this, sort of as a better experimentation, right? On play effect, you have experimenting. If you graft this to an experimentation, then you experiment twice. And then it also pays off your experimenting as well. So in the late game, it'll potentially reveal for 3. By default, it reveals for 1, which is not great, but not bad. Pretty quickly, it'll reveal for 2, and then you're happy with it. And then if you get to the end of the research track, which I think you usually will, then it reveals for 3, and you've got a Pyre de Vries on your hand, and then you're starting to buy Spice Mist Flows. So, solid little card. It's great if you can combine it with another Agent Box card to get more and more benefits. And I like that it goes to green because that benefits it with the card draw focus of the card implicit, right? Like this helps you with Spice Mist Flow strategies, and I think it's good for Ilbon in particular. Yeah, nothing bad to say about it. The fact that it grafts green will help you with your Swordmaster, with your High Council, and it means that you can trash your daggers a little more aggressively without worrying about the possibility of losing access to your Swordmaster. Okay. Next, we have the Bene Gesserit Sister, and she is kind of a fun little card. I wouldn't put her much higher than 60, but I'm also never sad to have her. So, what does she do? She's got no agent box, and this is about as high as a no agent box card can get. We still have one that I can think of remaining that has no agent box. We'll get to her in a bit. But the benefit of the sister here, I think, A, it accesses faction. B, it's got the BG, so it will turn on your BG cards. 3, it has a very flexible reveal. I think this is the only card in the game that could reveal for daggers, or it could reveal for persuasion. So you've always got that floor, right? You've always got that, well, in the worst case scenario, this card will give me what I need in terms of my persuasion requirements, right? And actually be better than average on persuasion. You can take a card that's better than average on persuasion, or you can take a combat advantage. And I love that you can wait until your reveal to decide what you need, right? You wait till you reveal, you see what the daggers are in the combat, and then if you want to go up, you can, and if you want to buy cards, you can do that instead. And I've found myself using both modes, which really is a testament to the fact that this choice is not like a false choice by any means. It's good. It really is. And going to Bene Gesserit is great. That's a faction that I love to visit. That you often don't find yourself having enough access for, honestly. And the ability to go to Lancerat is also good. Use your Mentat, use your selective breeding, use your Swordmaster, High Council, etc. So it's a solid little card. I'm always happy to have it. And also, like I said with the Initiate, this is a starter for your other Bene Gesserit cards. You can take this to selective breeding, draw more cards, and then the future BG cards that you have, those will be turned on. So, solid. Oh, I guess we stop at 60, right? We start at 75, so 75 through 60. Yeah, that seems like a good place to leave off. So there you go. So we've gone all the way to BG Sister. Not a bad card at all. Those of you that have quick reflexes will have noticed the next card on the list, but I'm going to leave it off there. And yeah, you guys have a great day.